Hey everyone, this is Brian Holmes with the Strategic Living Podcast and BrianHolmes.com. You're listening to my great friend Stephanie O'Brien, and you are about to be moved by purpose.
Let's stop shaming and blaming people for wanting meaningful work, because work that isn't meaningful or making an impact is very quickly going to be automated and outsourced. So it's not entitled. It's actually quite smart to keep looking for ways to make a greater impact.
Are you longing to know what your purpose is? Are you on the wrong career path? Do you feel like there must be more to life? Don't worry, there's hope. It's time to be moved by purpose. Now your host, Stephanie O'Brien.
You are listening to the Moved by Purpose podcast. It is your host, Stephanie O'Brien. Today's guest is Jenny Blake, and she is an author, career and business strategist, and international speaker who helps people organize their brain, move beyond burnout, and build sustainable, dynamic careers they love. Jenny is the author of the forthcoming book, Pivot: Turn What's Working for You into What Is Next, and Life After College, which is based on her blog of the same name. Today you can find her at jennyblake.me, where she explores systems at the intersection of mind, body, and business. You can also follow her on Twitter at Jenny Blake. Without further delay, let's welcome Jenny. Welcome to the show, Jenny. I am thrilled to have you on today.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It's great to be here.
So I ask every guest this question, which is give us a feel for kind of who you are and what were the things in your life or career that were going on that led you to doing what you're doing today.
I would describe myself as an avid bookworm, in love with New York City, if not married to it altogether. And I've had a lot of my own career transitions. So much of my career has been spent studying those transitions. I worked at a startup right out of UCLA. Then I worked at Google for 5 years in training, coaching, and career development. And now I've been running my own business, doing career consulting, coaching, writing, and speaking for 5 years. And beneath all that, one of my favorite blog posts that I wrote a few years ago was called 10,000 Hours of Neuroses. And it was to highlight the fact that, well, if I've done one thing for the first 30 years of my life, it's have anxiety and be neurotic and figure out how to solve this inner angst and confusion. So I've certainly done that for 10,000 hours, which is what has led me down the rabbit hole of reading all the books that I do and all the writing that I do. And then in the last few years, I'm 32 now, things have definitely shifted in a really wonderful way where I feel much more calm than I did in the past. But a lot of what I address in my forthcoming book, Pivot, is how to manage the change process, given that we're all going to be experiencing career change more frequently.
I think there's some people that can embrace change, but it's still difficult. And then there's some people that are just completely terrified and paralyzed of change. So, like, they like the way things are, they like what they know, they like what's certain and familiar. And when change is on the horizon, or when they know it's time to make a change, it's really difficult to navigate through that.
It can be hard not to judge change as this change is good, but this one's bad. You have a client, an entire business. It's really hard because we're having to say no to something good, or our life has just completely fallen apart and we're trying to build something from scratch. And in both cases, it can be overwhelming, and it's hard not to have fear and insecurity and self-doubt take over in those moments that we're being asked to create something entirely new.
Yeah. And here's some of the common objections that people give, no matter really what the case is. Whether someone that's been in a career field for 30 years or someone that just graduated college and is like not even a year into their career, to someone that just started their business and now is kind of rethinking or rebranding, they almost always say, I don't want to start over, or I'm afraid that what's new, what if it's worse? Or what if I don't succeed at that? Or I put so many hours into this and now I feel like I'm having to start from the bottom. Have you encountered that or experienced that with your clients, or that common objection, or even yourself?
Absolutely. When I was thinking of leaving Google, number one, I felt crazy. I felt like I must be that entitled millennial that the media keeps talking about, that here I am at a dream job and I'm still feel like something is missing. What is wrong with me? And as I was leaving, or contemplating leaving, I would ask myself, oh gosh, exactly as you said, what if things get worse? What if I end up broke and have to go find some other job that's not nearly as great as this one? But anytime that fear-based question came up, I started to train myself to also ask, what if I earn twice as much in half the time? So it's okay to have fear, but what's like a second scenario where things could end up much better? I think it's interesting that we know that change is the only constant, wisdom as old as time, and yet we still resist it. We know change is the only constant, but yet we resist it so much. But this is like wisdom as old as time. It's not a new concept, that nothing is permanent.
It's so interesting how, I know, change really is the only constant, and there's so many resources out there available to us to help us navigate through the change, and how do we handle that? And, I love how you were at Google, which is like an envy place to work for or work at. I dealt with like a similar thing. Like, I wasn't at a cool company like Google, but, when I was feeling like struggling, like, this is what I went to college for, this is what I really believed I would enjoy, and then like a year and a half into it, I was like, I don't think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, or I just envisioned so much more, or there's something missing. And then I felt guilty because I graduated in the fall of 2009, and I live in the Detroit area. So that was a very difficult time for people to be looking for work. There were highly skilled workers accepting entry level wage jobs just to survive. And entering the marketplace as a graduating college student was really difficult at that time. So when I did get a job, I started feeling really guilty. And again, am I being really ungrateful and entitled here? Like, I should be thrilled that I have a job. And I was grateful to be employed. But I also was like, this just isn't right for me. And I really had to fight those feelings of, am I being entitled and ungrateful, and what's wrong with me? Why am I not content here? And why do I feel like there's more? And so it's nice to have someone else that had like Google, which is like the golden place to work for. And you were feeling like there was more. And being in that millennial age, I guess there's millennials that just feel like if they have those feelings that they're just fitting that stereotype of being entitled. And that's not always the case.
Right. To me, it's a spectrum, and certainly your story of graduating in 2009 in Detroit. I mean, the zeitgeist at that time was take anything you can get, especially if you're a recent grad. Anyone, really, particularly in Detroit. It was like any job, just take anything. And I think that, number one, I believe, so when I say there's a spectrum, neither you nor I quit and just said, this isn't my highest calling, I'm going to quit and do nothing until my purpose reveals itself. That there is a way to be grateful for what we have and the opportunity that's in front of us, and use that underlying question of what else is out there for me as motivation to learn and grow and start things on the side, like your blog and podcast, and then work our way into that future direction. I talk about in Pivot that sometimes finding a life purpose can be so overwhelming, and especially when you're early in your career, it's not always clear. So figure out a project-based purpose. Maybe your first job out of school, the project-based purpose for the next 2 years is just learn how to be an adult, get a place, pay the rent, and the job doesn't even really matter. maybe then if you start a side hustle, a blog, and a podcast, the project-based purpose is explore the topic of purpose and start building a community. And that in doing that, we take the pressure off to have to know right away. And then instead of jumping straight to this idea of entitlement, we're just saying, actually, I believe that if I do pursue this feeling that there's more out there for me, ultimately I can make a greater impact. And that's one of the biggest points that I make in my work, in my book, which is let's stop shaming and blaming people for wanting meaningful work, because work that isn't meaningful or making an impact is very quickly going to be automated and outsourced. So it's not entitled. It's actually quite smart to keep looking for ways to make a greater impact.
That is good. And I think people, I mean, most of the people I encounter, they actually desire to make a significant contribution and to make that impact and to influence. For entrepreneurs just starting off, it takes a while to establish a well-known brand or well-known name. And I had to learn that, okay, because impact and influence is a huge drive for me. And when I was first starting off, it was kind of discouraging where I would write a post and nobody was paying attention, or I put my podcast out and nobody's listening. And to show up and do that consistently when the numbers weren't necessarily affirming me with what I was doing, that can be difficult. But I had to train my mind, because if I just focused so much on what I was doing and how it seemed to not matter because no one was paying attention anyway, I had to redirect that, because there was something significant happening to me. The discipline of showing up and being consistent, even if it seemed like nobody was paying attention and nobody was listening. There's great character that gets developed through that.
I think that's the problem that so many people face, that we give the advice, build a platform, have a creative outlet, but then it is really discouraging for a lot of people. So I'm curious, because I saw you've now posted 97 podcast episodes, which is really awesome.
Yeah, it is. I can't believe that much.
Yeah. How did you make it through that dip and keep going? And what's your experience now, 97 in?
Yeah, thanks for asking. You're actually the 100th recording.
Woo! That's so exciting.
Yeah, I have 2 in the editing phase right now. They haven't been published yet. So,
happy anniversary. Happy 100th.
Yes, 100. It's big. I was like, I should be doing something much bigger for number 100.
Having cupcakes and champagne.
Yeah, I know, a big thing, but I just keep going. I think that focus of just keep going, I had to get my mind off of the numbers. So I stopped looking at analytics in the beginning. I stopped looking at all that stats and all of those metrics and measurements, because those are discouraging in the beginning. And I started focusing on the impact and what kind of more long term. How can this episode that I'm doing now be used later? And I would start sharing an episode that I would do in the beginning. I would send it to a friend. I said, I just recorded an episode on that. And I sent it to them. And then they wrote, and they're like, this really blessed me. And I listened to it over and over and over again. I've listened to it every day this week. And, that, keeping my eye on that, I was like, you know what? It's not about the math numbers or math metrics. It's about the one. And, and think of them individually. So I try to focus on and envision the people and the scenarios that they're in when they're listening to these interviews or my podcast episodes, and envisioning if I don't get this message out there, how they won't hear the encouragement they need at the right time. And it's not about me, it's about them. And so that's what really pushed me through. And when I stopped making it about how it doesn't matter, it's because they are listening. And I can find someone that needs it, like I said, a friend that had it, and just let that carry them through, even if the numbers were really low.
Absolutely. I feel similarly. I started a podcast unofficially over a year ago, and then officially launched into iTunes couple months, let's say 6 months ago. And I realized, yes, exactly what you said, that no matter how many people are listening, as long as someone's getting something out of it, but more so, I am learning so much. I'm getting to talk to many of my heroes, and just the excuse to like have a conversation with one of my favorite authors. There's so much personal growth and excitement and joy, and even teaching myself GarageBand and audio editing, and there is so much to be said for the learning and challenge and the having to ask important people, like facing rejection, and there are all these intangible lessons that go so far beyond the metrics, like you said, the size of the audience.
I agree. There's so many things. And I still like the purpose behind my podcast is not, sure, is it a marketing tool? Yeah. But it's like, it's about, it's relationship building. Like you get to have conversations with people that are really successful. You also get to be, for me, I love the generosity of it too. Like I love finding up and comers or people just starting off and being like, hey, I'd love to feature you. I don't just highlight the people that are way ahead of me. I also like highlighting the people that are just starting off, because that goes a long way. And you know what? The person that's just starting off, there's something about the rookie that the inspiration and the drive, there's something about it that I love that inspires me so much, and that's contagious. So I love being around the newbies just as much as I love kind of sitting at the feet of the people that are way ahead.
That's awesome.
So your book, Pivot, I guess, tell us about that. What is your favorite or the key message in that book for people to take away?
The biggest takeaway that I learned while writing it is that we hear the statistic that the average employee tenure in America is 4 to 5 years. That was not the experience that I noticed interviewing people for the book. It's possible that I attract people who pivot more frequently, but the biggest observation is that I couldn't keep up with people. From the time I interviewed them to a year or year and a half later when I was fact checking, they had already changed again. And so really the message is that career change is happening more frequently, and it's no longer relegated just to a midlife crisis or quarter-life crisis, that actually we may face those existential questions every few years. And so is there a way that we can become better at it so that it's not such a crisis? And as much as it may be disorienting, it is the new normal. So instead of seeing a pivot, which is a methodical career shift in a new direction, it's not a big, scary leap. It's actually building from what's already working. And you mentioned sometimes people are hesitant to start from scratch, and that's why I call it a pivot. Career change doesn't have to be a 180 from what you're doing now, really, nor should it be. Although some people can be successful in doing that, it's a bigger risk. And so I recommend that people start with small experiments and pilot things. Do things that take 10 or 20% of your time. That's kind of one of the principles that we had during my time at Google, 10 and 20% projects. And that use those pilots to test things and gather data before fully moving in the new direction.
Very smart. So some people will contact me and they want to start a business and they have multiple passions and they could go any direction with that. And they're having a hard time being able to objectively see like how to connect their current experience, their past experiences, what their strengths are, and to be able to tell or see if that's even a smart direction to head into. Have you had clients or people you've worked with that are in a similar situation, that are multi-passionate and having a difficult time connecting the dots, or how does this fit into what I already have?
If that's the case, there's usually two approaches that I'll take. One, asking, what do all these project ideas have in common? What is the larger umbrella that encompasses all of them? And so maybe they're zoom out to 5,000 feet. There's something that connects them all that's actually the new direction. Or sometimes it is a matter of narrowing down, in which case think of all those ideas like racehorses at a starting line. You may want to give all of them a little bit of time and attention at first to see which one takes the lead. And takes the lead, for me, I evaluate on three things. I call it the 3 E's. Enjoyment, expertise, and expansion. So do I enjoy this thing? can I become an expert at it? And do I want to develop my skills in this area? And then is there room to expand this, let's say it's a side hustle, into a full-time?
For some reason, when I'm working with people in their 20s, they seem to think that hitting age 30 is like the end of, like, they only have their 20s to meet their goals. And if they're not met by the time they hit 30, then they have to settle for something less than what they want. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if you've encountered that or if that's a new one for you with that age mark. I think I even did that myself. Like, I want to be this accomplished at 30. I don't know if it's because you see, the 30 under 30 and all of these successful entrepreneurs or people that accomplish amazing things at a very young age. And if that's like the expectation that some of these people have.
I'm sure those lists have something to do with it. Many of my friends are older than I am, so I more heard 30 in my head was always like, things really calm down right in your 30s. But everyone had told me, oh my goodness, I started to feel so much more confident. I know who I am. Your career kind of starts really finding momentum. So for me, it was more something to look forward to, though I will say turning 30 was it was a hard year in general for me, and I think a lot of people experience that. For anyone into astrology, there's something called your Saturn return, which happens from the ages of 29 turning 30, and it's a notoriously crazy time of feeling like the rug is getting pulled so you can rebuild much more strongly. And I think that's why so many people then say in their 30s they feel like, I'm more aligned now. I'm less anxious. I'm less trying to please everyone else, and I know who I am. But that said, yes, I think people, of course, I think we all sometimes put pressure around numerical age or deadlines. And, in some cases it's helpful. I have learned in general not to attach so much to goals. Like, I actually find it much more of a relief to just focus on big, meaningful projects and trust the evolution of those, but not attaching to a specific results, kind of like what we talked about with the podcast.
So letting go of the outcome or the results, like, that's a big one. And that's something that I feel like I have learned. I can't say I've mastered it yet, but through all of the failed attempts and the things that I've done that don't work, I have done more things that don't work than do work. And there have been goals that I've set and numeric outcomes and things that I've just been really hustling for and like really believing that they would happen. And then they fall horribly short of that. And it can be an emotional roller coaster when you do that. And I just think doing your best, showing up with excellence, doing your best, looking at the gift of the moment of like what's happening now, what's happening internally, and opening your eyes to, I guess, the process and really just centering yourself on how can I just really enjoy every single moment of this, regardless of outcomes. Of course, you can have an outcome and be strategic and be as wise in your steps to have certain outcomes, but learning to surrender the outcomes has really been a game changer for me. And more times than not, when I don't get too attached to an outcome or an end result, that's when things end up being so much better.
Right.
Like, I almost feel like having a specific outcome can limit you to really receiving the full gift of the entire process.
True. We're usually far less creative than what ends up happening. We mentioned Christine Hassler before we hit record and her book and her concept of the expectation hangover.
It is powerful. It certainly was not easy for me to do, and I don't know if I'm a very fast learner in some aspects, but when I want something, it could take me a while to learn the lesson of surrender. But I feel like life is so much more free and liberating and enjoyable when you learn to live in kind of a place of surrender and being able to receive the gift of whatever is meant to be given to you. And not to have a preconceived notion of what that is, or I think that it should look like this, and I'm not going to be happy until I see it happen this way. When really you're completely missing that something so much greater and more beautiful is presented before you, and you're not able to see it. because you're only looking at the, I only want this. And I feel like I've robbed a lot of joy from myself by living that way. I've learned not to, and I just think life is so much more enjoyable. And you hear that statement of, it's not the destination, it's the journey. There's so many beautiful things happening on the journey. If you just open your eyes to like the scenery around you on the journey and what's happening and what are the lessons and what are the gifts there for the journey. I just think when you finally do reach the destination, whatever that is, like if you're opening your eyes to it, it's so much more powerful and beautiful, and like the impact and influence you can have is even greater when you see that.
Most of us learn the hard way. I mean, it's only from having those experiences, as you said, where you've almost robbed the joy, or you feel very anxious, or pursue something and keep hitting dead ends and brick walls and are so frustrated. And I know for me that this idea of surrender only came when I was at my wit's end. And I'd had a really hard year. It was October. The year had just felt absolutely relentlessly difficult every day. And finally I just said, I give up trying to be happy. I'm done trying to wake up and be happy, because the gap between where I am and what feels like happiness is so far, and nothing I'm doing seems to bridge it. And so I just said, please just help me find equanimity. Just calm. I give up on happy, and I surrender. I turn this over. I'm stuck. And I was reading a book called Outrageous Openness at the time, which I absolutely love. I've reread it many times since. And the author, Tasha Silver, talks about surrendering. Like, I turn this over to you, divine, show me the way, or show me a next step, one next thing, or if I'm meant to do this or take this action, give me a sign. And like starting to co-create with the universe instead of feeling like we have to do everything ourselves.
So true, that co-creation. We have a part. We have a part, but we have a part, which is like key. We're not the only and solely responsible. And when you do get alongside whatever your belief is and whatever you want to call universe, the divine, God, you know, when you get in touch with the creator and say, okay, let's do this, and trust in the process and that surrender and the co-creating, it's a really exhilarating way to live. I find that my life is so much more full and joyous. Not that, and when I say joyous, I'm not saying that I live happy every single moment of every single day, but like just stepping back, and even in the midst of turmoil and in the midst of adversity, how can you still find joy in the moment? And know and trust that everything's going to work out, even if you don't see a clear end to this. Absolutely. And that's kind of the lessons I've learned.
Yeah, 100%. And when can we ever see the end of things? Like, that's what's just nerve-wracking about being human, that when things are going well, sometimes we fear, when is the shoe going to drop, you know, or how long will this last? We don't know. And when things are going bad, it can feel like, oh, when is this going to end? Is there ever going to be an end to this? And so that's kind of the good news and the bad news of existence, that everything is cyclical, and there are seasons of our life and seasons of our career. And living in New York, I grew up in California, so I've lived in New York 4.5 years now, and it's very interesting to actually have seasons and feel like all I want to do is rest in the winter and stay indoors. And then spring starts to become more social and getting out, and it's actually really helped me to see how those patterns are reflected in my own life and career and business as well.
Yeah. Seasons teach us a lot, and it's great because seasons change, and, you know, we hear things like seasons of life. And so if you are going through a difficult time and you're really struggling and you just want this to be over, for me, I've had to remind myself, this is temporary. This is just a season. The spring will come. You know, that barrenness of winter, you're like, I really would like to see some life right now. My own coach, Dan Miller, said that winter is actually, even though it looks very barren outside in the weather, that like the trees and there's a lot of life inside, that they're more alive internally than they are externally, and they're preparing for that spring. They're preparing through the winter to produce the leaves and the flower and to bloom externally. If you're going through a season where it feels like it's a barren winter for you, just realize there's a lot of life getting developed and you are being prepared for spring.
I love that.
So
that's really cool.
Well, how can people connect with you? How can they find out about your book or what you do, more about you? I'm sure they really loved your message and want to know more about you.
Yeah, you can find me online at my first website, which is 10 years old now, lifeaftercollege.org. I blog most regularly at jennyblake.me. The book Pivot comes out in September of this year, 2016, and you can learn more about that at pivotmethod.com. And then I also have a Pivot podcast where I interview peak performers and reverse engineer career change, but also how to deal with change in general.
Yeah, make sure to check that out. That's very relevant to the listeners. So thank you. It was a pleasure interviewing you, Jenny, and connecting with you. I always enjoy meeting the guests on the show, and it's been really an honor. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on your 100th episode, and big thanks to everyone for listening, too. Career change is happening more frequently, and it's no longer relegated just to a midlife crisis or quarter-life crisis, but actually we may face those existential questions every few years.
There you have it. That was Jenny Blake over at jennyblake.me. Make sure you connect with her on social media. Get her book that's coming out in September. This sounds like a great, great book. She also has a podcast I strongly encourage you to listen to and check in. It definitely is relevant to what you guys are dealing with regarding making a pivot in your career or business or direction in life, and pivoting that and doing that strategically and methodologically like she said. She's definitely someone that to pay attention to and to listen to, and she knows her stuff. If you have not done so already, make sure you come on over to movedbypurpose.net. Subscribe to the list where you get exclusive access to pilot courses, free coaching offers, and access to me where you will not get outside of the list. So there's a lot of perks with being on the list. You guys get offers sent to you, pilot courses. I'm repeating myself now, so you already got it the first time, so I can stop rambling on. Anyway, make sure you connect. If you like this episode, share it with other people. This helps me get found by more people. If you have not subscribed yet, subscribe, rate, and write a review to this podcast. Let me know how this podcast has, or anything you read has helped change your life. If you have a question, make sure you write in and let me know how I can help you. And I look forward to talking to you all next week.